Rudy's Revelation.
I'm American, I have rights.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Google me, bitch! Google me!
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. It is Wednesday, November 20th. So Biden escalates the war in Ukraine again. 2 days in a row. And the liberal media continues their warfare against Trump and everything MAGA, particularly Donald Trump's new cabinet coming in. Going to talk about these headlines and more, but please engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast, give me a thumbs up. All right, let's get into the headlines. Right, first up from the BBC, Biden agrees to give Ukraine anti-personnel mines. So the United States, among other countries, have been railing against anti-personnel mines. It was a famous crusade of Princess Diana because they kill indiscriminately. A lot of times children, and many years after conflicts wear down, that innocent civilians get killed by anti-personnel mines because they kill indiscriminately. And a lot of times, even if the minefields are cleared, some mines might be left behind. So they're very dangerous, as I said before, even after conflicts wind down. Next headline up from the Express U.S. Russia threatens U.S. with nuclear war by Christmas and chilling World War III warning. A former spokesman for Putin has warned of nuclear war by Christmas after Ukraine was granted permission to fire Western long-range missiles. And what people really don't talk about too much here is that the fact these ATACMS missiles, shadow missiles, etc., can be equipped with the nuclear warheads. And so if you're receiving incoming missiles, long-range missiles like this, they're ballistic missiles, so they're of some concern to Russia, obviously. Next headline up. Excuse me. Is from PJ Media. Undersea cables and natural gas pipelines, a bunch of odd coincidences in the Baltic. Also, the Financial Times reports Chinese vessels spotted where Baltic Sea cables were severed. So what's of concern here, if you hadn't noted, that North Korea, China, and Russia, as well as other NATO countries, are preparing for World War III. The population in the United States seems to be grossly ignorant of this fact that we're sleepwalking, or Biden is sleepwalking, towards World War III. BBC again is reporting Ukraine warns people not to panic over Russian psychological attack as embassies close. Is it a psychological attack? I'll just read from some of these headlines here. Ukraine says Russia is staging a psychological attack. It seems like they're prepping for World War III. They're cutting communications cables, undersea cables. They're launching psychological attacks. They're warning of nuclear war because of Biden's and NATO's continual escalations over 3 decades. The psychological attack is spreading messages of a large attack on Kiev and other cities. Is it a psychological attack? Is it a warning? It comes as the U.S. Embassy in Kiev is temporarily closed after it received information of potential significant air attack on the 20th of November. That's today. Italy and Greece have also closed their embassies in Ukraine's capital, while the UK's embassy remains open. The Foreign Office says the Spanish embassy closed for several hours but is now open. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden agrees to give Ukraine anti-personnel landmines. A defense official tells BBC as the U.S. steps up aid to slow Russia's advances. The problem here is the narrative from the West is that somehow it's Russian aggression when the escalation and the provocations from NATO have continued over decades. And if anybody was listening to Russia, nobody in the West, particularly the populations of the West, are not listening to what Russia says because it's deemed as propaganda. But Russia has been talking about peace and a ceasefire ever since they tried to establish the well-established now buffer zone in eastern Ukraine. Now, why do they need a buffer zone? Because they said under no circumstances were they going to give up Crimea. And there are a bunch of strategic reasons for this, and they can't have NATO controlling the Black Sea and basically bottlenecking the Russian fleet there at Sevastopol. More headlines from CNN. Stockpile diapers, medications, baby food. NATO members Sweden and Finland advise citizens on how to survive war. Germany is also in the mix. They're apparently, Stolz there in Germany is trying to sue for peace. Also warning their citizens of Germany to prepare for a new world war. ABC News, U.S. Embassy in Kiev warns a potential significant air attack as Russia accuses Biden of seeking to prolong war. That is NATO's objective, is to draw out Russian, not just Russian defenses, but Russian technological prowess. All the technology that they've been holding back to some significant effect, they want to draw out their technological capabilities and continue a war of attrition is what Russia is accusing Biden of. It's really NATO and the establishment. Whether Biden himself is making these decisions is questionable. It goes on to say the temporary closure was out of an abundance of caution, said an update. Well, because if Russia nukes Kiev, it's going to be problematic. And whether it's a conventional bombing of Kiev or something more significant. People don't understand we are the closest to nuclear war than we've ever been. Even during the Cuban Missile Crisis and even during those 10 days in November during Reagan's term. Reuters is also publishing this headline, Putin ascendant in Ukraine eyes contours of Trump's deal. Now, what is Trump's peace deal? Reuters reports, and this is the problem with this, is Reuters is a captured media agency, captured by the intelligence services. So they're trying to say Putin wants to come to the peace table because of these latest provocations. That's just exactly the opposite. Vladimir Putin has said that he wanted to negotiate a peace, but Russia's security concerns have to be taken into account, which have never been. Vladimir Putin is open to discussing a Ukraine ceasefire, the deal with Donald Trump, but rules out making any major territorial concessions and insists Kiev abandon ambitions to join NATO, which was one of the conditions always, which is really what this is all about, is about NATO's progression eastward since 1991, since the fall of the Soviet Union. Not 1 inch eastward, they said, James Baker said way back when. 5 sources with the knowledge of the Kremlin thinking told Reuters. Again, this is unsourced, so we can't really take it as, and I'm going to get to unsourced stories and the lawsuit against Catherine Herridge in a minute, but let's just go on with this story first. U.S. President-elect Trump, who has vowed to swiftly end the conflict, God willing, is returning to the White House at a time of Russia ascendancy. Moscow controls a chunk of Ukraine about the size of American state of Virginia and is advancing at a fastest pace since the early days of the invasion. Really because Ukraine is losing. They've always been losing. Ukraine is not a significant military, does not have a significant military. They have ground down. Generations of young men have been killed. Many Russians have been killed too. In this trench warfare, this proxy war of attrition against NATO's enemy. So the provocations have always been clear and been purposeful to draw Russia into an invasion. Almost the exact blueprint of what they did to Saddam Hussein in Kuwait when April Gillespie, the envoy to Iraq at the time, met with Saddam Hussein 2 days before the invasion. Or was it 2 weeks? It was a long time ago. Back in 91 as well. It was a long time ago. But the U.S. envoy met, or the U.S. ambassador, I guess, to Iraq actually met with Saddam Hussein, and then not shortly thereafter, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, seemingly green-lighted by the U.S., who then, condemned them and then launched a major military occupation of Saudi Arabia and then an invasion of Kuwait and then Iraq. The first Iraq war, not the one in 2003. More headlines from the Washington Examiner. Kamala Harris escapes to Hawaii as Democrats reel from 2024 losses. Is she escaping a possible first nuclear strike by Russia on the United States? Keep in mind, there are Russian submarines in the Atlantic, in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Pacific, that we've got about 8 minutes if Russia decides to strike. I'm not a proponent of war, or particularly nuclear war, and I don't understand why poking the bear is so important, and why strategic or territorial concerns in Ukraine are worth billions of our tax dollars, hundreds of billions of our tax dollars, as well as possible nuclear war. Because, Putin and Russia has warned many, many times not to escalate. Biden himself had said, if we send Abrams tanks and sophisticated fighter jets to Ukraine, that would start World War III. Well, he did that. If we give them long-range missiles, it's going to start World War III. Well, we did that. Well, if we give them permission to strike inside Russia with long-range missiles, that would do that. That would start World War III. If we give them anti-personnel mines. And you have to understand, when they're talking about anti-personnel mines, they're not talking about a few hundred or a few thousand. Anti-personnel mines are deployed in the millions. All right, let's move on. Post-millennial MSNBC contributor Jennifer Rubin urges boycott of Morning Joe after Mike and Joe visit Trump Mar-a-Lago. She goes on to say, if you don't appreciate the audience you have, betray the audience, and lose their trust, you're going to lose a lot of them. I have seen this movie, says Jennifer Rubin. Jennifer Rubin is an idiot. She's the Washington Post columnist who last week claims Republicans want to kill your kids. It's actually true, she says. Yeah, I don't know if it's actually true. I don't know at all if it's actually true. You can't talk broad themes. You have to be pithy, she says. Jennifer told Democrats on her podcast. Yeah, I don't know. I think she's, and most Democrats are in fact insane. More headlines from the Washington Times. Florist who refused to serve Trump supporters closes shop amid fierce backlash. Of course, there's a backlash. Because how can you, as a business, first of all, how can you discriminate against customers? There might be some extreme instances, like let's say you're a devout Christian and you don't believe in homosexuality, and then a gay couple comes in and they want you to put, a gay couple figurine, a same-sex figurine on top of the cake, they might not want to do that. But just saying I'm not going to serve you because you're X, I don't know. I think that's discriminatory. Although, as a private business, you're reserved the right. But I don't believe that refusing to serve people who voted for Trump, that's like half the population. I think you're shooting yourself in the foot. But moving on, the Federalist Michigan Senate Democrats push to ban unapproved election speech. Now, this is an important headline because it's censorious. It's compelled speech. So what they're talking about is, I'll just go to the story, SB 707 would outlaw intentionally and knowingly making a false statement or misrepresentation about elections. Finding anyone who violates the law $1,000, an employee of the accused for an election-related purpose would face $10,000 in fines. The bill passed from the majority Democrat Elections and Ethics Committee on November 13th on a party line vote, of course, said Republican State Senator Ruth Johnson. In a statement to the Federalists, State Senator Ed McBroom and Johnson were the two Republicans on the committee, and they voted to pass a third opinion that is not yes or no. I don't know why they just didn't vote no. See, I think it's your right in free speech to make claims that you want to make. Because the problem with Democrats is they go with their subjective narrative as true, and then anything that contradicts that they would say is a lie or a false statement or a misrepresentation. Now, a false statement is way different than a misrepresentation. A misrepresentation is taking a fact and coming to a conclusion that's different than, let's say, the majority. Just the News is reporting that censorship cartel on its heels as Trump appointees litigation crack open alleged conspiracy. What's the alleged conspiracy they're talking about? The alleged conspiracy they're talking about is what I was just talking about, which is censorship. And it's what it is really fascist censorship. It's when the government and a private entity get together to curtail the speech rights of everyday people, even if they're talking about elections or health concerns, health care, gender, all sorts of different things that have been banned by the regime. So there are a bunch of lawsuits and congressional hearings still going on censorship under the Biden administration. More headlines from the Federalist. Bob Casey, who's the incumbent senator in Pennsylvania, files more ridiculous lawsuits in search of additional votes. This, of course, is problematic because this is what they're doing in California. They're slow walking the vote tabulation, and what happens in each and every instance with a slow walk tabulation, they just find enough votes or admit enough votes to put the Democrat over the top, and then they go, okay, we're done. So we need to put a stop to this because there's no reason that California should be counting votes 2 weeks after the election. What do they have, one retarded guy counting the votes? I mean, if you need more people to count, then hire more people to count. I don't understand that. PJ Media Their headline, "Do you want to see how elections are stolen? Watch Pennsylvania." And they referred to a dissent by Clarence Thomas in 2021 after the fraudulent election then in 2020, in his 2021 dissent in which the U.S. Supreme Court refused to take another fraud-filled Pennsylvania election case. You could almost imagine Justice Clarence Thomas crooked forefinger wagging at his colleagues when he wrote in his dissent. The reason they didn't take up the case, and the reasoning is, by the way, is there wasn't enough proven fraud or alleged fraud to overturn the election, so the Supreme Court didn't want to weigh into something that wouldn't change the result. But election fraud is like tip of the iceberg. The whole point of election fraud is to change the outcome of the election. So if you find a little, there's likely a lot. And any recount would show this. So Clarence Thomas goes on to write, "One wonders what this court waits for. We failed to settle this dispute before the election and thus provide clear rules. Now we again fail to provide clear rules for future elections. The decision to leave election law hidden beneath a shroud of doubt is baffling. By doing nothing, we invite further confusion and erosion of voter confidence. Our fellow citizens deserve better indeed." Because there's still cheating going on. The problem is Trump won and everybody was like, yay. But if you look at what's going on in California, now we have such a narrow margin in the House that literally some of Trump's appointments could put the House majority in jeopardy. Just the News is reporting Trump's cabinet picks draw out agenda opponents in old guard GOP. That means the establishment GOP. Who are they? Well, Mitch McConnell and his acolytes. Cornyn, and of course Thune. And Thune promised to allow Trump to get his appointments through, but I doubt that's the case. People say a lot of things. The Democrats and the liberals are saying, well, we're soul searching after the election loss. They're not. They're saying that while the cheat and the counting is going on, but you can see it in the media and with liberals are taking new strategies, this time not pussy hats, but now shaving your head and telling men, we're not going to sleep with you because you voted for Trump. Or we're not going to sell you flowers if you voted for Trump. Remember what happened in Trump's first administration? That Sarah Huckabee Sanders was kicked out of a restaurant because she was the press secretary for Trump? What did Maxine Waters say? At the gas station, in the restaurant. You're not welcome. Tell them you're not welcome here. What the fuck is that? That is not what American politics should be. You win, you lose, you run again. But first of all, you have to have confidence in the elections, and that means getting rid of mail-in, mail-out ballots. All right, next headline from Mediaite. Saudi Arabia's bitch, Tulsi Gabbard, once accused unfit Trump of pimping out U.S. troops to foreign leaders. This is an old statement, but this is Mediaite. So if you didn't know what happened here, Gabbard, who was a cabinet pick now to lead the entire U.S. intelligence community, not all of it, mind you. And the director of intelligence, that's where all the intelligence is given, supposedly, and this was created in the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11, and so you can make sense of all the intelligence, but the actual intelligence gatherers decide whether or not they're going to share it. They're supposed to share everything, but I don't want to digress anymore. She accused Trump of being Saudi Arabia's bitch in 2018 while running in the Democratic presidential the presidential primaries. Hey, real Donald Trump, she wrote on X. I think it was still Twitter at the time. Being Saudi Arabia's bitch is not America first. Gabbard posted on Twitter in November of that year. Gabbard was reacting to Trump's decision to continue to sell arms to Saudi Arabia in the wake of the brutal murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. And if people didn't know what the hell was going on here, you have to understand the coup in Saudi Arabia that Trump supported. What was that coup? That coup was to support MBS, one of the sons of the late Saudi House of Saud ruler, who was, let's just say, less militant than his other brothers who were running the country before, who had deals with the Democrats to help export Islamic fundamentalism, Wahhabism, and militancy. They didn't want the militants in their country, so they wanted to get them out. And the Democrats were like, well, get them out and let us control them, and we'll help them fight whoever they want to fight. So maybe she's been briefed on that now. She knows what happened with the assassination of the column of the Washington Post columnist who was reporting on the coup, which was dangerous for the Saudi prince and, of course, for Trump. Because he's, I don't care. I wouldn't have minded if he reported on that, but that was the reason he was murdered. More from the Federalists. Republicans must defend Matt Gaetz to end the use of salacious lies as a political weapon. Now, if you didn't know what was going on here, Matt Gaetz is up for Attorney General, a part of Trump's cabinet. I hope he's at very least appointed or confirmed in recess, because I think it'd be good for the job. And you should just go on YouTube. I watched a couple mashups or compilations of Matt Gaetz just challenging everybody in the establishment, from Chris Wray to the current Attorney General to everybody. I mean, he's fantastic. So if you want to reform the Justice Department, which I think needs reforming, he's the man to do it. But the current establishment had launched a honeypot against him. Did he probably conduct himself in a lascivious manner? Perhaps, but he's a young man, but he got caught up in a honeypot. So let's go to the NBC article. Matt Gaetz's accusers don't want to testify in public, their lawyers say. So their attorney, Leopard, told NBC News that his two clients want their private testimony before the House Ethics Committee to be released, but don't want to speak publicly. Well, that's bullshit. First of all, these girls were set up by intelligence agencies as a honeypot. They don't want to be revealed. Well, that's the bed that you're going to have to sleep in. If you're going to come out and slander somebody, and I'm not saying that Matt Gaetz didn't have sex with people for money, but he was never accused of a crime, and that's the point I'm trying to make, because they tried to catch him in sex trafficking, and the fact of the matter is that somebody that he had sex with was 17 at the time, but she told him that she was in her 20s, and he paid for a plane ticket for her to fly to somewhere he was going to be for sex, that he was going to have sex with her, and same with these other girls, that he gave them money to do certain things, and they're the one that are testifying that it was for sex. None of this has been proven out in court, obviously, or in testimony. The story goes on to say the two women previously told the House Ethics Committee that Gaetz had paid them for sex, but there are no confirming witnesses. And they're the ones that said that he had sex with a 17-year-old. So all the allegations are coming from these two people who don't want to be forced out in public. Why? Anybody who says stuff like this, it should be seen as, it should be taken with a grain of salt. In any case, it's very much like the Trump case, where what's-her-face, that author, accused her, Trump of raping her in a dressing room or something. There was no confirming evidence that that ever happened. The only confirming evidence that they put up in a civil trial was that she supposedly told good friends of her at the time that it happened. And they came out and testified that that were the case, but there's no proof that that happened, except for their testimony. There were no emails, or they didn't recover any text messages. And even if they did, it was unlikely that that ever happened. All right. The real juicy part here is from the New York Times. Hackers said to have gained access to file with damaging testimony about Gates. The computer file is said to contain testimony of the women or the woman who said she had sex with Matt Gates, President-elect Donald Trump's choice of Attorney General, when she was 17 years old. But, come on, a hacker? Does the hacker happen to work with an intelligence agency? I think so. Most of the hacking, people have to understand that most of the hacking that goes on are done by paid intelligence, cyber hackers, for lack of a better word. So that's not surprising. The fact is they're drudging up this old honeypot operation that was found, that there was not enough evidence found to even to bring criminal charges against Gates. So if he actually sex trafficked a 17-year-old girl, there would be criminal charges. But the fact is that wasn't the case, because he had proof that she said she was 20. He probably suspected that she was younger, but got her on record to say that she wasn't. More headlines from the Washington Times. Joy and vibes. Trump's signature dance takes on a post-election nation by storm. If you haven't seen this, this is great. There have been a handful, maybe half a dozen athletes from the NFL to UFC who, after touchdowns and victories, they do the little Trump dance, or a modification version of the Trump dance. Trump's dance is actually like this. It's the mashed potato, but they start doing this. It's similar. I don't think it's the same, but whatever. But the UFC fighter that did it first, apparently, he said it was an homage to Trump. All right, so Elon Musk. All right, SpaceX fails to repeat Starship booster catch as Trump watches on. This is from AFP. So this is a slander against Musk. The fact is this rocket was the heaviest heavy lifter ever to be put in space. I believe it was a test mission. I didn't follow the story too closely. But the victory was to get it into space, because it was the heaviest rocket ever. And they failed to catch the booster, but it was recovered regardless. It didn't blow up or anything. It just, what they do is they have a platform that the thing is supposed to land on, and then the arms are supposed to catch it. So I don't know exactly what happened to the booster. I'm sure it was recovered, and maybe it could be repaired, maybe not. I don't know. But it's this constant, oh, it's a failure. No, the mission was actually a success. Catching the rocket, you know, the last part of it, the last 2 minutes, didn't work according to plan, probably because the rocket was so heavy. And that's the problem when you do experimental things. You don't know exactly what might go wrong. But they might get enough data to be able to do it next time. All right, big news over the past couple days. This is Fox News. Pentagon fails 7th audit in a row, unable to fully account for the $824 billion budget. See, that's why Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to be heading up the Department of Government Efficiency, because it's a grift. Billions of dollars from COVID to the Defense Department to the money going to Ukraine is seemingly sent and spent, but disappears. So where does it go? Many people suspect, and rightfully so, that the war in Ukraine is actually a money laundering operation. And apparently, there was enough evidence in the FTX trial of Sam Bankman-Fried to suggest that that was indeed the case. That they were actually helping launder the money coming out of Ukraine. And where did it go? Back to the Democratic Party, to the establishment. So if you don't think people are getting really rich, and we're not talking millions of dollars here. We're not talking Menendez level corruption. We're talking billions. Just to read a little text from the story, the Pentagon failed its 7th executive audit on Friday as the agency was unable to fully account for its massive $824 billion budget, which actually was the biggest U.S. expenditure, but now the biggest U.S. expenditure is national debt service. So on the $37 trillion of debt, we pay about $1 trillion a year in annual debt service. That's interest. Though officials were confident the Department of Defense has turned a corner, we're almost there, they say, is an understanding its budgetary challenges going forward. The audits resulted in a disclaimer of opinion, which means auditors were provided with insufficient information to form an accurate opinion of the accounts, which means they were opaque about disclosing where they're spending money. So, first of all, the black budget of the CIA and many other areas, including DARPA, is part of the problem, but this is in the DOD, which this is supposed to be transparent, the Department of Defense. Of the DOD 28 reporting entities that had standalone audits, 9 received an unmodified audit opinion, 1 received a qualified opinion, 15 received the disclaimers, and 3 opinions remain pending, the Pentagon said. Oh boy. You wonder where our tax dollars go. You wonder why we're $37 trillion in debt. I thought we went over this back in the Clinton era when Al Gore went on late night. Was it Jay Leno? I think it might have even been Johnny Carson at the time. And said, why do we pay, $10,000 for a screw? Well, that's one of the reasons. Is because somebody's getting the $9,992 that was overcharged. What they do is they say we spent this much on a screw, and they actually spend $2 on the screw, and the other money that they said was allocated for the screw goes to somebody. So it's actually you're laundering illicit payments to certain people. All right, the Federalist again, FEMA director says criticism of agency is misinformation. What a joke. It's all the federal bureaucracy is bloated and full of graft. That's the reason people get rich when they go into government. Not only do they get rich, but, their cohorts also. New York Post opinion by the Post editorial board, even Biden's Homeland Security admits that the violent migrant crime is exploding. If you didn't know, 16 states, Nicaragua, has set up shop. And that doesn't, Nicaragua is not MS-13. It's not individual criminals who were let out of prisons and mental institutions in Venezuela or anywhere else for that matter. Mostly young men coming to the country. Even though the mainstream media continually shows the border, shows people crossing the border, if you were to go by their video clips, you would think it's all women and children crossing the border and families. It isn't. It's a small percentage. All right, let's get to journalistic, anonymity of journalistic sources. So the legal showdown over press freedom, and this is from the Free Press, for free people, they say. And if you didn't know this story, a ruling against former Fox News reporter Catherine Herridge could cripple journalists' ability to protect whistleblowers and provide critical information to the public. And this article by Jay Solomon goes on to say, one of the things that makes America exceptional is that journalists here have freedoms that exist nowhere else. One of them is the freedom to publish information the government wants to keep secret. That also requires the freedom to rely on confidential sources to get that information. Okay, so I worked in journalism for 30 years. This is the issue. The issue is, if you're reporting on national security, supposed national security, i.e. look at Ed Snowden, if you're exposing illegality within the national security state, you can get a pass for anonymous sources. But the problem is that you can't use anonymous sources every time you report a story that has to deal with the government. So a couple weeks ago, I keep railing on this. The Hill reported, anonymous sources report, that conservatives were going to challenge Mike Johnson for the House Speaker. It never materialized. So we can blame the Hill, which I do. It's another captured news organization. But we're not able to hold their source accountable. So they might use this source again and again, continually claiming anonymity. And we don't know if we're getting fed bad information or not. And that's the thing with sourcing material, is that certain sources can be trusted by the reader, not by the journalist. And that's why they have to be aired out. There should be no reason that the majority of sources, or the majority of stories now have anonymous sources. This became a problem during Trump's administration when there were all these editorials by whistleblowers, unnamed whistleblowers. Now, in the beginning, you can have a whistleblower that's anonymous, fine. But eventually, they have to be willing to come forward. And we should strengthen whistleblower protections. Julian Assange didn't get those protections. Ed Snowden didn't get those protections. And they were the biggest whistleblowers. Maybe going back to Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. And then they tried to build these straw man arguments around different whistleblowers. That's an issue. The issue is anonymous sources can and should be kept anonymous if dealing with sensitive national security issues. As long as they're exposing wrongdoing. Okay, fine. But the problem is instead of becoming an exception, which when I was in journalism, it was always an exception. If people weren't willing to go on the record, you couldn't run the story. But if you're dealing with very sensitive information and national security issues like with Deep Throat and, Watergate, what have you, it's a different story. Okay, you get a pass. But if you start using it for every story, it's a problem. All right, I have a personal issue with that, so that's why I had to go on. All right, the Wall Street Journal, FDA to investigate forever chemicals found in seafood. FDA is looking for data on how PFAS affects seafood, the environment, and processing water. Yeah, it's an issue. You got to get RFK Jr. in there because he's one of the ones that's saying that the health risk from this shit is even bigger than we would imagine. And all of these things follow the route, okay? Pharmaceuticals, plastics, go back to the petroleum industry. Petrochemicals. That's where all these things go back to. Plastics, pharmaceuticals are all derived from petrochemicals. So, okay, I don't mind burning fossil fuels, but using petrochemicals to invent things that you say are going to help but actually end up hurting us, it's bullshit. We should go back to glass bottles. If you're still drinking water, and I do drink water out of plastic, but if I had my druthers, I'd like to get it in glass. And when I do go out to eat, I never drink the tap water. I always get bottled water, and it's usually in glass is the best way to get it. But, corporations, they don't want to ship it out because it's heavier, so it costs more in shipping, and then you have to deal with breakage, which is a loss. More headlines from AP. Brazilian police arrest 5 officers in alleged 2022 coup plot to kill President Lula. Too bad they didn't succeed. No, I'm not for violence, but you have to understand is the socialists, the communists in Brazil, including the ones in the court, and don't forget that Lula Silva is a communist, and he was put into place because they didn't want the Brazilian Trump, Bolsonaro, to get another term. And he was railroaded. But if you looked at the overwhelming support of Bolsonaro by a cadre of different demographics, including the native population in Brazil, you could see it's overwhelming. But no, they made all of a sudden the communist who was removed from office once as president and jailed for wrongdoing, his record was cleared so he could run for president again, and here he is. Terrible. The Daily Mail is reporting church in Switzerland is using AI-powered Jesus hologram to take confession. Project Bluebeam is coming. They're just running a test here. So Project Bluebeam is when alien Jesus, a hologram of Jesus, an alien Jesus comes out of the clouds and tells the world to accept what the establishment has for them, whatever that may be. So that's Project Bluebeam. More tech news, the Washington Times, Kissinger final warning, prepare now for superhuman people to control the earth. Humanity must begin preparations for no longer to be in charge of the earth because artificial intelligence, according to a new book from the late statesman Henry Kissinger and a pair of the country's leading technologists, that Ike Eisenhower, warned us about the technological elite. So if you didn't know what superhuman or the Ubermensch that Nietzsche first started talking about. So, going back to the article, the rise of AI creating superhuman people is a major topic of concern in Genesis, published Tuesday by Little Brown and Company. It's the latest book from Kissinger, according to the publisher's parent company, Hachette. Kissinger was a longtime U.S. diplomat and strategist who died last year at the age of 100. This is where it gets creepy. Kissinger's co-authors, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. Now, Eric Schmidt is still the CEO of the parent company Alphabet, if you didn't know. So why they say former Google CEO. And longtime Microsoft senior executive Craig Mundy finished the combined work after Kissinger's death. The Washington Times has obtained an advance copy. Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Mundy wrote they were among the last people to speak with Kissinger and sought to honor his dying request to finish the manuscript. How scary is that? Pretty scary. So what is the Ubermensch? Well, Ubermensch is the superhuman, and the superhuman is the singularity. So it's combining this silicon-based life form, AI and robotics, with humans. How that is going to take place, who knows? Superhuman strength, who knows? But super intelligence, purportedly. So the idea is for rich people to be able to live forever with the aid of technology. So that's the narrative for themselves. So they're going to rule our lives. And it's coming. Whether it's possible or, it's part of the narrative, part of the agenda to be elevated between basic alpha. If you go read Brave New World, alphas and betas, and we'd all be beta, and there'd be a new stratum of the elite where they would live forever and their powers would be greatly enhanced through robotics and access to technologies, which we would not have access to. So the ACLU reports new NYPD drone policy represents a serious threat to privacy. Indeed, if you didn't know what was going on here, the New York Police Department was going to use more drones. Okay. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I don't like drones. I don't like autonomous drones. You know what I saw yesterday in the evening sky? I'm like, what the fuck is that? It looked like a flock of birds. It wasn't, because it looked semi-transparent. It had an outline, but the way it was moving across the sky was weird. It moved sort of like a plane does, but it wasn't a plane. It was too low, and it was transparent. So it had kind of an outline, and it looked closer. It looked like a flock of birds. It was actually a drone swarm, a huge drone swarm. I mean, there were huge drones. There might have been a dozen, maybe 25 drones flying in the evening sky. And you could always tell something that's based in technology, whether it's a UFO or what, just because of the way it moves. It's not natural. Because even flocks of geese and stuff, the way they move, you know, they turn up, they go down. Half the time they don't know where they're going. So that's an hour. I guess we're stuck with an hour because that's about how long it takes to get through the headlines for the day. All the headlines that are worth reading. I try to give you the most news possible, the most news and analysis possible, because you have to kind of reconcile what it all means. And as I always said, you know, we're fighting against a technological agenda. You know, the technology is not for your benefit. They used to say that in the 50s, you know, oh, you're going to wash a machine, you're going to have, you know, the Jetsons, you're going to have a robot maid, it's going to be great. But it's not. The advances in technology are detrimental to our health and to our life. We need to start a bit of a Luddite revolution of sorts. Everybody likes their phone and stuff, but it's not good for you. You got to be able to put it in the drawer. Now people can't look away. It's a mind control device. Like I always say, you're under attack psychologically, biologically. So remember that. And join me every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. live on Rumble. Check out my other website, libpop.org. Check me out on social media, X, Facebook, Get Our Minds, True Social, Substack. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Stay hip to the trick. Respect.
The New World Order.
This is all a conspiracy. No, you know that is a conspiracy.
The New World Order.
I kill you.